Next up, we have Chris Ball to talk about Bison. And Chris is about to come on stage, and I have never spoken to Chris. I'm super excited to meet Chris live on stage. Oh,
Going
Chris, how's it going?
great. Doing
All
well.
right, dude, I gotta ask, what camera are you using?
What camera? It's a Sony A6100.
Okay, is it an actual DSLR?
It's a DSLR. Yeah. I've just got it mounted on the desk, and yeah, I like it.
Okay, yeah, no wonder it's super crisp. Well, welcome to Mint Bean, and I'm super excited to meet you finally. And we've never talked before, and I'm
No
dying
time
to
like the
learn.
present.
Seriously, and I'm dying to learn more about Bison. Tell us more about yourself.
Yeah. So CTO at Echobind. We work on a lot of projects in this space, and that's kind of what Bison was born out of. So I'll go over that here in a second.
Super cool. Okay, so I'll leave you to it. I'll be shout away, and I think you have a presentation prepared. So, super excited to see what you got.
Cool.
All right.
Sounds good. Can you see the screen here?
No, actually, nobody can. Are you on Firefox?
Nope. Let's see what we got. Hold on. Take two here. There we go.
There we go. All right. Well, happy hunting.
All right. Good stuff. Okay, so just wanted to take a little bit and talk about what Bison is, and then also just talk a little bit about the ecosystem in general and how it fits in. So Bison is basically the baby of all these things, so much smaller in scope than what you've all heard previously today. And just wanted to give you a little bit about what we're going to talk about here. So first of all, fsJAM, Full-Stack JAM, we don't really know what it's called yet because it's still a new community, but this is one way to kind of brand it. So you thought you were on the JAMStack, but now we're talking Full-Stack JAMStack. There's reasons why that's awesome, so we'll talk about that a little bit. I know you've heard some of those already. And talk a little bit about why we started developing Bison. Like, what was the point? Why did we see it was a good idea? How might it be different? How is it the same? Talk through some of that. I'm going to go through a demo so that you can sort of see what it provides. Talk about a roadmap, what's coming up, and kind of what I see happening in the community over time. So I just said this, no need to restate it. But on Twitter, I'm cball_. Still can't get the non_, but lots of people have that issue. Feel free to hit me up and talk about any of this. I'm really, really interested in discussing these concepts. So fsJAM. So this is actually a new Twitter account, fairly new. I'm not sure if this has been brought up yet today, but again, this is like kind of a thing that's kind of becoming a little bit of a brand, and we'll see how it all plays out. But basically, Full-Stack JAM, it's an upgrade to the traditional JAMStack. Lots of things have been proven over the past few years in JAMStack, and it brings a ton of power, a ton of benefits, and we're going to try to take that a little bit further. So why do you actually need this? Well, for most apps, you need an API, and you likely need a database that powers it. And so to me, what I start thinking about is, well, instead of this separate world all the time of like, here's the front end, here's the API, like what if you just start thinking more about your general app? And you just mentioned frameworks like Rails. I'm sure that has been discussed a little bit as well by Brandon. There's a good feel in some of that, but we want to kind of have a modern take. And so really just thinking about like, how can we make this just the app? Like it's all here. You can see everything. It's not these kind of separate worlds. So that's really nice. Redwood has a tagline of bringing full stack to the JAMStack. And I think that's really what all of this is about. And it's interesting to me that like this whole thing was not even remotely possible just a few years ago. And so JAMStack is not exactly old. This is very new. And it's sort of evolving over time because we keep building upon really nice abstractions. And finally, this community is growing, and from what I've been seeing, growing very, very fast this year specifically. So let's talk through a couple benefits. I know some of these have probably been discussed, but once you own more of the stack and you can assume things about the environment, it gives you a lot of benefits. So you can think about, you don't have to think about always, oh, well, what databases do we have to support well? How do we consume data? all these things, you can make a lot of assumptions, which can be really powerful. So that unlocks some really great ideas that you've probably seen on display. Another thing I think is that we don't have to reinvent everything all the time. So Jamstack has some really, really great ideas. They've pioneered basically static sites with a global CDN and connecting to APIs and rendering all these things. And all of those are really, really good building blocks. So why throw that away? Let's just build on top of it and make everything even better. And then another interesting thing is that if we are no longer kind of separating these concepts as much of API and front end, then you have one thing that you're deploying to one specific place. So you don't have to, let's say, deploy your static site to Netlify or Vercel and then deploy your API over to Heroku or some other provider and do that kind of dance. So we have it all in one spot, which is really, really great. So why, given all of that, why Bison? There's obviously solutions already. So I'm going to try to shed some light on why this was released and just kind of talk you through it. So first and foremost, Echobind is an agency. We build web and mobile apps for clients. We work in a lot of different tech. So it's not that we only work with TypeScript and kind of Jamstack stack and all these things. We work on Rails projects, we work on Elixir, we do a lot of different things. But when we have the opportunity to work on a greenfield app that we're creating from scratch, we need a starting point. And so we might not use this 100% of the time on a greenfield app because it could change depending on the team's needs. But this is where we want to start from. So that was kind of the first thing. And we've been using Next for a long time now, and it's just proven to be great. We also do a lot of mobile apps, like was just mentioned. GraphQL is really great for mobile. And so for us, kind of having the combo of Next.js and GraphQL is like a really, really big win. So we wanted to kind of use that as a base and build from it. And finally, we wanted to share our learnings and our kind of way of approaching this, because I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but we're in this stage right now where as a community, we're all trying to figure out what this looks like and what are good practices, what doesn't work so well, all of that. And so by just opening up everything that we've been working on, it sort of gives additional input across the board. And so it's not to say that all of our ideas are great or all of them are terrible, but it's all just other data points that everybody can use to kind of better the whole community. And that's really the goal here. So along those lines, do we really need another option? And like I said, we do, I think, because we're in this kind of stage of innovation of this kind of area of Jamstack. And it's important to sort of feel all this stuff out. And approaches like this will likely converge and consolidate eventually. So that's not to say we're going to end up with exactly one thing and one way of doing it, but there's going to be aspects that we're going to learn that tie in together and we can all agree on. So let's look at a few ways why something like Bison is different from Redwood or Blitz. So the first thing is that we've decided to use Nexus. So Nexus is a way to create GraphQL without writing the GraphQL SDL. It's basically a DSL, if you're familiar with those concepts, but basically you're going to be using functions to generate the schema for you. Some good things happen there. One being that it's kind of, you don't have the types and the resolvers in separate places. It's all kind of in one area, to where if you need to change the type, you typically need to change the resolver, not always. But if you do, it's all just kind of right there for you to work with. And what we found is it's actually really productive once you understand the syntax. So that's kind of the key to Nexus. It's not terribly difficult, but when you first look at it, it's a little bit different. But I think there's some good advantages there. So one of which being able to generate types, even if you're not using JavaScript, Nexus, or if you're not using TypeScript, I'm sorry, Nexus can actually generate types that will help you autocomplete in your editor when you're writing JavaScript code. So we're not using that exact feature, but Nexus does unlock that. We decided to include what we're calling API request tests and Cypress end-to-end tests out of the box. And it's really important to note that these things are both true end-to-end tests. So they leverage a test database that's in memory on CI. And it's reset between tests. And so if you, the idea with an API request test is I can make a GraphQL query just with a normal request, just with a post. And I can know that it goes through my entire stack on the API side. So it hits the front end server, it goes down to the database through the resolvers, and then comes back and is actually rendered out to a response. And so we use this to basically check all of our API edge cases. So if you have someone logging in, one thing happens. If they try to request a field they don't have access to, you get a different set of data, and just all those permutations where we don't necessarily want to test all of that at the full end-to-end front-end testing layer, but at the API request end-to-end layer, it's actually really, really nice. And so that's one thing that we baked in. And then Cypress kind of builds on that and actually drives when you're running on CI, the app will be loaded completely for you as a server. And so we're not operating Cypress against a staging database or preview URL, which is the other way to do this. But we're actually running it against that app in the container while we're running tests. So it's the app that is about to be deployed is a good way to think of it. And so that's really, really important once you get to releasing production. It may not matter as much when you're in preview, and if you break your preview URL, it's no big deal. But in production, this is a good one because we make sure end-to-end tests pass. So those two things I'll go into more in just a second. And related to that, we've decided to wire up GitHub Actions CI. And so historically, Circle CI has been kind of our bread and butter. We've loved it. But recently with GitHub Actions, we've kind of been asking, like, do we still need Circle? Is there a way to have clients have one kind of place for their code and their CI? And obviously, this is why GitHub made it. But it's one of those things that I wasn't really sure, given the preview, played around with it a little bit. But in practice, it's actually turned out to be great. And so we're currently working on actually doing the same thing with our mobile applications, which is a significantly more complex process. But this GitHub Actions will run all of these tests for you without you configuring anything, because it's all built into the generating, and run continuous deployment. So it's going to deploy to the host that you're looking at. And so really it's kind of that last mile is probably a good way to think of it. So it's not just creating an app, it's not just getting it together, but it's like, well, how do you deploy the thing? How does CI work? All of those things that I feel like people often wait till the very end to look at or think of. So that's why we kind of wanted to include it out of the gate. Then GraphQL CodeGen is what we're leveraging to generate lots of types for us. So this project basically will look at the schema that's generated for your GraphQL API. It will generate all the types for that. And additionally, we have it set up to where it will look for any GraphQL tags in your components, pull those out, and give you a really nice query hook to call in your React components in order to fetch data. And that data, once you fetch it, is fully typed. So what's really great about all that is you don't have to go create all the types manually, which is a total pain. And finally, we opted into Chakra UI. I heard Brandon just talking about that. That has been really great. It's a CSS and JS solution with really nice primitives. You get a lot out of the box there. And so what you're not going to be doing by default, and what we typically don't do on these kind of apps, is add a ton of different styling. You're going to obviously override things, but out of the box with the primitives, it's actually like really easy and really productive to go customize, the theme and spacing and margins and all that stuff. So that could be a whole talk, but we like Chakra. Okay, possibly controversial topic, but basically, we're kind of viewing this as like a manual framework. I personally, where Bison is at the moment, I feel like is slightly past what people would typically call a boilerplate. But that's kind of the general thought, like get started with an app, but there's a lot of conventions baked in, and there's some other stuff too. I personally hate that word. So I like to call it a manual framework, because really it's compiling kind of a framework together based on learnings that you've had. And typically, so that's what that is. And the not locked in part is basically that we're using a lot of libraries that already exist. So for our forms, it's React hook form is what we've decided on. All these different things that essentially, if you were to go write this yourself, this is close to where you would end up, is the goal. So along that, like if you disagree with something that's been decided, it's extremely easy to go change, which you'll see here in a second. Nothing is really hidden. Now, over time, we're probably going to add some nicer wrapper scripts and clean up some things a little bit so that it's not quite so in your face, but always want to have it very accessible to change. Another thing is we decided to make it deployable to Heroku, which is interesting because Heroku is absolutely not a Jamstack provider. But Heroku is extremely easy to use. Lots of people are kind of like tied into Heroku for other reasons. A lot of people use their database. So it was something that we felt would be nice to just go ahead and add, especially when I get to talking about like what kind of some of the other visions are in terms of setting up, databases for you and all of that. We have that already done in the Heroku integration. So that was the way to prove out that section of it and then allow us to bring it into the other providers. Another sort of controversial option. We went back and forth on this, but there's no Yarn workspaces. There's no separate API and front end. If everyone hates this, this may change over time. But what we're trying to do is at least feel out how it feels as a kind of commingled, sort of like more like a typical monolith project, like Rails or Django or something like that, to where your files are all there, and they may not be separated by front end and back end. And so that could be a bad choice, but what we wanted to do is run the experiment because it's felt decent to us just internally and see what people think. And like I mentioned before, Bison is absolutely the baby here. Blitz and Redwood are more ambitious projects with a much larger surface area and trying to tackle some other problems that may not kind of work with what we're doing. But just kind of wanted to mention that. So let's look at how all of these are similar. Prisma being one. So what's interesting about this to me is it's collectively been agreed that Prisma is a really, really great building block that you can all build upon and get a lot of benefits without tons and tons of code. So that's been good. I'm not 100% sure on Blitz with Netlify. I know Redwood supports it. We're trying to work through it at the moment. There's some hangups there that we're trying to work through. And Versal. And so I think everybody has agreed that both of these providers are kind of the major Jamstack players and it needs to be supported. Generators are a big thing, which are really important. CLIs, TypeScript is obviously huge. I know Redwood is extremely close to shipping TypeScript support if they haven't already. I think they're just very close to doing so. And then conventions. And so conventions used to be one of those words that Rails people loved and JavaScript developers hated. But I feel like over time, some of the JavaScript community has realized, well, the conventions are actually really good. And then I think the caveat is as long as I have an escape hatch seems to be what people say. But I guess people are warming up to it a little bit more and just understanding that we're all kind of doing the same thing. So the more we can kind of share solutions, the better off we're going to be. So let's look specifically at Blitz. So with Blitz, it also uses Next.js as the foundation. They can both be deployed to a traditional server. This could be entirely possible on Redwood, and I just don't understand it. So keep that in mind. But this was my understanding here. And then some other things, React frontend, GraphQL API. This is how we're similar to Redwood. So GraphQL is a big thing. I know with Blitz, you don't even really need the API because of the way that's architected, but you get the generated API you can leverage going forward. We've decided that React testing library seems to be a really good way to test kind of components. And we actually stole the concept of cells from Redwood because it's a really nice, just small abstraction as to how you load and fetch data that and this is what I mean by shared solutions. And so it's like, this seems like a great idea. Let's kind of leverage that here and feel it out in a slightly different context. And everybody wins. So the real theme here, I think, is that this is not a competition. We all sort of win from all of the experimentation between all of these frameworks. So let's talk through a little bit of a demo. So the first few of these that I recorded, I had my aspect ratio off, so I apologize on that. But this should give you an idea of just the basic kind of CLI. Again, we all like CLIs. What this is doing is creating a new URL, or you're pasting a GitHub URL in first, creating the local database names, passwords, all that stuff, because we want to try to just set that up for you. And so what we found in just kind of like trying this out with a few people is that sometimes, going and setting up the proper permissions for Postgres and all of that, it takes a little bit of work, and going and changing the URLs. And so what we want to try to do, you still have to go set up Postgres on your own. We're not doing that. But specifically, if you say the username and password and where your Postgres instance lives, we fill everything else in for you. And then you'll see the section about, where do you want to deploy the app? So right now it's Vercel. Heroku is an option there. Netlify, like I said, we're still working on. And then basically there's just a few things that we want to do. So the first is we want to go into the project. So that should be the next thing. Okay. And I'll just run yarn-db setup. And so we've decided to say opt into kind of the colon convention at the moment, but it's basically yarn-db setup that's going to go through and run probably what you've seen just a minute ago with Prisma migrations and generating types. So with what we're doing specifically, it's also generating the Nexus types for you on this first run. And then I'm just scrolling back up and looking into seeing, what else do I need to look at? What do I need to run next? And so what I'm going to do after that is just run the dev server. So what this is going to do, like I said, it's not starting up a Yarn workspace with separate things, but what it is doing is running next dev for you. And then it's also starting a watcher that's going to generate the code gen types and the Nexus types. And so what that means is every time you go in and modify files that are related to that, it's going to regenerate them for you so that you can just leverage them in their components, which you'll see in a second. So now that we're on a better aspect ratio here, we'll start the server back up again. Takes just a second. And so you see in here, there's, Next is doing its thing. There's Nexus. And anytime you see that waiting for file changes for reflection, that's what I'm talking about actually generating the API for you. And you'll see in one of the other examples here that I'll pull up the GraphQL API that's been generated, and we can just look through it. So the next step is to see what does that give you out of the box. So I'm just going to load up localhost 3000. And you can see that we have, loading states. There's a basic sign in and sign up feature. You can see that it's pre-rendered by Next, the same way a typical Next app would be. There's a little bit of styling here. We added a shadow, but tried to keep it very plain, very simple. And there's validations that are both client and server side. Just wanted to have some examples in the project out of the gate on how to use it. And so again, this is using React hook form. And I got an error logging in because I didn't have an account. So then this page will go through and create an account. And once I do that, you should see that it logs me in automatically. And, we refresh the page just to be sure, typically. And then that all looks good. So we'll just go ahead and log out. So authentication here is just JWT and cookies. I know that both Redwood and Blitz have significantly more complex authorization options and plugins that you can add, which is really, really awesome. This is just a very simple JWT by yourself, no extra kind of stuff needed, just to get going is the idea. So it is using cookies. And the reason it's using cookies is so that you can opt into any of the Next.js server stuff anytime you want. So if there's get server side props that's available in Next, you can just leverage that. And so if you weren't using a cookie, that would not work because the local storage does not work when you're on the server side. So that's there. All the forms are there. And this is just a peek into the database. So that created a user for me. And there's right now out of the box, it's just a simple user table and a simple profile table that joins together. So it's a little similar to what I saw Brandon just show. And basically, this is just again to get going. Didn't want to assume too much. Didn't want to assume things like avatar URL or anything like that. But that's those. So then now let's hop into the code and take a quick look at that. So to start off, we have templates at the top, which are hygiene templates, which you'll see I'll edit some of those soon, but those are basically, if you need to change any of the templates, they're right there.
Hey,
so
Chris,
the way
quick
things
note.
are generated. This
Quick
is going
note.
into Chakra, looking through the theme file by default. We kind of left the default colors in. This whole theme is customizable though, so it's pretty easy.
Hey, Chris,
Then,
can you hear me?
yeah.
Hey, could you zoom in just a little bit if you don't mind? I think it's just a little bit too small for people, and it's not easy to see.
Yeah, let me... Good point. Let me drop my resolution on...
Your resolution is so high, I can't tell what it is.
I know. I just forget where this is, actually.
I like the fact that you can deploy Bison on a traditional server. That's one of the things that bugged me about Redwood, personally, is I'm a traditional kind of guy. I want options, and Redwood is strictly serverless. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's not much more effort to get going on Heroku, so we just decided to do it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, let's see. I had an app to do this that I forgot what it was called.
There's an app for everything.
Shoot. Help me out here. I'm completely blanking on where the... Oh, duh. Scaled. So maybe we'll go down to this.
And drum roll. All right, yeah, all right. That looks good. I'm gonna hop off. I think you're in good resolutions now.
Okay, let me just real quick go back to full screen. You can tell me if it's all crazy looking. It's all stretched.
Hey, everybody else, because I can't like make that big. So how's it look now? Is this good? Isaac, Brian, good, bad, ugly, pretty but not quite beautiful.
It looks a little squished to me, but
yeah, it kind of looks a bit squished to me too. I love the frame. I wonder if you can just get rid of that frame.
Let's see. So what do we want this at? Like,
so Isaac says it's about the same as before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That looks way bigger.
Yeah, everybody's saying it's the frame. Yeah, still the same, I think. Can you get rid of that frame? Okay. So Brian's saying he can see it when it goes full screen, but I know for a fact that we won't be able to capture this on video. So if you get, are you able to get rid of that frame at all?
I don't know. How do I do that?
I have no clue. I don't know what you're using Keynote. I have absolutely no clue.
Okay.
Navi said that's so much better. Okay, I'm confused now. All right. Yes, if it's good. No, if it's bad. Do you want to turn the frame on, and then we can give them a fair shot at judging? I want to make sure that this is amazing stuff, and I want to make sure that.
Yeah. Okay.
Oui ou non? No? Oui? No? Oui? All right. I can't do this all day. I'm not French. Okay.
This is where had I not recorded videos and actually just been live coding it, it would have taken 2 seconds. But
yeah. Can you do it without? Okay,
no, we
gotta know. Can you do it without the Keynote thing? Yeah. I think that might work.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Tell you, well, let me do that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that fixes everything. Okay, cool, man. I'll let you get back to it. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not actually sure if this is any better. It looks pretty small. Hopefully we're good though. So I'll just try and do this a little bit here and there while this is going. But basically, yeah, I wanted to go through Chakra. There's some built-in components here that we provided. And so these are very simple. But again, they're just meant to be building blocks. And there's a lot that Chakra actually provides as well. You can see there's Cypress. We'll come back to that here in a minute. And then we have a GraphQL folder. And just wanted to give you a very quick idea, just glance of what Nexus looks like. So this is what I mean by it's a little bit of a difference if you've never seen it, but there's some really powerful stuff that comes with it, including some plugins and things for Prisma. So next up, pages is just your typical Next.js pages. In here, we're rendering a login form that is use form from React hook form. And then a little bit further down, you should see, oh yeah, use login mutation. So this is one of those generated types. This looks crazy, this file. You don't really have to worry about it too much. I just quickly wanted to hop in there and show you what the generated types actually look like. And so this use login mutation, that's all you have to do. And if you pass it the right data, it'll tell you if you're passing the wrong things. It'll tell you if you're looking at something that's not on the response. And it gets the name from what you give it up there. So that's where the name of this actually comes from. A little further down, we have the API folder, which only has a GraphQL file in it. You can see we have our pages in Prisma. This is like any other kind of Prisma setup. And then a little further down, we have a services folder for some of the API services, and then tests. So this is kind of one of the biggest things. And so, like I mentioned, end-to-end testing, we'll go through some of those. This is a simple login test that obviously we don't have the types 100% yet, but it works. It basically uses Cypress with the React testing library extension to go through and keep that same kind of API, which is really nice. We have a factory system set up so that when you're creating new users for your tests, you just say userFactory.create and you pass it the data you need. And that's just a very simple factory pattern, so it's not going to handle anything. You have to do all the nesting yourself. But basically, we added a task in Cypress to allow you to create a factory and then do some stuff with it. You might notice there's a comment there, they don't support async await, separate topic, Cypress thing. But it's just kind of showing you, just giving a quick glance of what I'm talking about here. So these are the request tests that I mentioned. So this is going in and creating a user with that user factory. We're using inline snapshots here because we're actually matching an error response. And you can basically see what a normal test looks like. We're expecting that a user's role is admin when it comes back. And this is looking just at request body. So it's actually looking at the response that's coming back. Then we have unit tests for components that are more your typical React, React testing library style components. And then utils, which doesn't have much in there yet. So this is the generated GraphQL API. And this is what comes out from Nexus. And so if you ever think about like, how can you go back and adjust it? It's right there if you ever wanted to split away from Nexus and go into a traditional like separated SDL and resolver setups. And then this right here is from CodeGen. This is how we have it configured. You don't even need to worry about this, but I just wanted to show you that it was a thing should you deviate from it. Okay. So next up, I'm going to show you what tests look like. So for our tests, it's just a typical jest watch setup. I'm going to just run tests here, and you're going to see a request user test. So there's some errors there that are happening, but those are expected because those are actually causing exceptions. Then they're actually coming back through the GraphQL API as errors. So that's totally expected. There may be a way to sort of silence those a bit, but for now they show up. But you can see all the tests pass here. So this is an example of request tests and unit tests. And so that's what the jest tests do by default. And then I'll show you what the end-to-end tests look like. And if you've never seen Cypress before, this is pretty awesome. So what we're going to do is first kick off, I think, in headless mode. And so what that's going to do is, like I said, start up the entire app. So you can see it started the server on localhost 3001. It's running all the tests against that. So we have two sort of tests in there by default. And you can see here, it's actually saving a video. And so what we do is for successful test runs, videos are saved. For failed tests, we save an image of it as well. And so when we get to the CI portion of this, you'll see how nice that actually is. Okay, so then, let's see. Here's what that looks like in non-headless mode. And so sometimes as I'm watching Cypress tests, it just, again, kind of blows my mind based on past pain of having to do things similar to this. It's a really, really great tool. And so, yeah, that's basically, I'm going to watch that one again because I think it's awesome. But we're doing, you can see everything that goes wrong. And if you've never used Cypress, any of these, if they fail, you can hover over each of those steps and it will show you exactly what's in the DOM, exactly what things look like. You can inspect it. It's a really, really great tool when you're doing end-to-end tests. And this here is an example of not running it in CI mode. So this is, I want to run it against my local server. So you can see it says, hey, your local server is not actually running. You should probably run it. And so the idea there is when you're running locally, to sign off Discord here. When you're running locally, you do not want to reset the database in between. And so the database should actually, because you want to inspect it, you don't want to wipe away all your users, have to reseed, that type of thing. So the Cypress local is really meant to just kind of test things out with what you have currently in your database and not have to necessarily start up just the CI process for doing it. So again, that's this. And then we will I'll show you how to make sort of what the workflow looks like. So let's say you want to make a new endpoint. We're going to call it cool users. And so I'm generating a request test, API test. Again, that's typically where we like to start from because that drives everything else. So I'm going to update this to say, we're going to call it cool user query. I'm going to paste some code in here, I think, to just to not, you don't want to watch me type all this out. So basically what we're going to do is create a new GraphQL query, and we're going to use these nice helpers that we're going to get by default where email contains cool. So we get those nice helpers with Prisma and the Nexus plugin to where we don't have to say like expose all of this. And again, you have to be explicit about it because you don't want to expose your database by default on your API. But if you opt in, you get those really nice where clauses, which feels really good. So we're going to add, basically say it works is going to be our test. And you'll see a few things happen here. So this is again using the user factory. And as I do this, you can see all the TypeScript types are telling me what is valid and what isn't. So it's really helpful as you're going through and making your tests. So then we have these little test helpers called GraphQL request, and GraphQL request is user. So that should be fairly obvious, but GraphQL request is just unauthenticated. And if you make it as the user, you pass the query you want to use, and it automatically adds the cookie value for you. So you don't have to worry about it. Typing a little bit slower here, but basically what we're going to do then is look at the users that are on the data that comes back. We're going to check that there's one of them there, and we're going to check that the email on that one matches the value that we put up at the top. All right. So what I'm going to do then is just try to run those. It's automatically picking up our new tests, and you can see that it said, oh, we're unauthorized. So just trying to see what was going on there. So we definitely used the right helper to log in as a user, but we weren't authorized. So what happened is we didn't pass a role. And so the way we have this set up right now, you can see roles is auto-completing. It's multiple roles. There is a little bit of a weird syntax that we might try to remove at some point. But if you ever set an array or any complex type in Prisma on the API side, you'll have to do it this way anyway. So it's a little bit more like it would be on the API. So I'm going to pass role admin, and we can actually take role right off of the Prisma client. And so what happens is when the Prisma client is generated, it generates the types for those enum. We have role as an enum in the database, and it generates it, and we can leverage it. And so we now are able to complete role.admin. Okay. So we'll try that. And now it works. And so the issue there was that the person was not an admin. And this was just to make sure that it was indeed working, which sometimes I do on tests after they pass. So we can see that that's good to go. Okay. So I think that should be it on this one. Then the next thing we want to do is extend this. And so what this is doing right now, we're actually passing, if you look, this is just the user's query. So this is the one that we already had built in, but we want to actually take this and move it to a different query. So instead of having that all passed in, we don't want that. So we're just going to say cool users. And so we're going to make that a new query. And I just wanted to show you one potential way to do it. And for some reason, I guess admins are going to be the only ones that can see cool users, but that's what we're doing. So we're going to hop into these special methods that are here provided by Nexus. And so by default, if you say t.crud.users, that generates a ton of very, very helpful filtering for you. So you have all your filters, orders. You can opt in. Right now we're saying just true. You can filter, you can order, but you can tell it specific fields, which is really great. And then there's this kind of alias command if you ever need to not make it say whatever the default is there. So the biggest thing with the CRUD operators is they're not going to authorize anything by default. And so you really need to be aware of authorizing them, which is why you can see there's an admin check right after that. But this is kind of what I was saying about how we're setting up the type, and then right below it, we have the resolver. Okay, so that's in there. So then the next step is to try to use it. And the reason why I wanted to spend so much time walking through this piece is that this is typically how I develop apps using this. And so we start here, we go through it. I wanted to just kind of give some quick exposure just so it would be a little bit easier than me just like saying, this is how we do it. Okay, so next up, I can't query cool users. So that didn't quite work, but I think the reason there was that the server wasn't restarted. Okay. Or actually, this may have been me just not editing my screencast properly. So we'll go ahead on that. Let's see, I think there's a way for us to move it. All right, we'll just move on. We'll just move on to the next one. So that we should have that query in place, and then we want to try to leverage it. And so should hop into the front end here. Let's see what we got. basically what you missed was me just restarting the server and rerunning the tests, and it picked up on the fact that there was a new query that was around. So the next thing we'll do is say, generate a new page. And that page we're just going to put right at the root. And you can see that we get some just general page stuff by default. And what we're going to do is make sure that the page actually works before we go any further. Okay. So we have a page, and then what we're going to do is leverage the concept of, like I mentioned, stealing cells from Redwood. This is sort of where we're thinking. And this will also show you there's here where we do have a current bug in this particular generator, but what's interesting is it shows you sort of how flexible this is. And so the generator cell command that's there doesn't work. And cells was the wrong command either, so something else is wrong. So what we're going to do is just look into the package JSON and take a look at it. And there's a bunch of scripts in here. And again, like we can clean a little of this up as we go, but they're all right there. And so basically, I realized that our script was calling cell instead of cells. So we're going to change the template instead to be cell. And then that updates our generator template. And similarly, if there's code in the template that you want to completely change, it's in that same folder. So it's all using EJS. It's pretty easy to modify, actually. So we do that. Now we have an actual cell component. And you'll see this is sort of, if you're familiar with the way that Redwood does this, this is a much more manual version of it. But what I wanted to do is just show like the basic idea behind it. So we're going to use some types. We're going to basically go into our test that we made and copy in the query. So that should be the next step. Okay, so we have this query that we had in the test that we know is already working on the API side. We're going to bring it in to this cell. Okay. And then once that's in there, what's really interesting is in the background, as long as this file compiles, in the background, you will have the new types. And so you'll see I'm just going to do a quick kind of dance to get through all these. And see if I can speed this one up again on this part. Probably not, actually. So what's going to happen is we're going to have a use cool user query. And so that's going to be generated, like I said, automatically. Sometimes you might have to hop into your types file if you don't see it updating. Sometimes VS Code gets a little weird with type generation. But generally speaking, all you need to do is import it from your types file. And again, as long as you have the GraphQL code in your component or in your cell, it should automatically generate in here. So that's what we're doing here. Do a quick close. Keep in mind, this is only like 3-ish weeks old, so there are a few edges, but that's how this thing goes when you get started. So basically what I wanted to show then is now we have a use cool query in the types file that we can pull in. We can put this back and leverage it. And then it says that our data me is incorrect. And so now you can see it autocomplete cool users as the response type. And here, I'm just going to change one other thing to where we're going to make sure that this is mapped to, instead of my profile query, we're going to map this to cool user query. And kind of, so again, like this isn't 100% from a UX developer UX standpoint, but it's close. Like what's there is really good. We just need to polish it a little bit. And so once you have those pieces, anywhere down further in your components under this, everything will be fully typed in your response, which is really, really helpful. And so I'm just going to quickly throw in a stringify so that we can see that it worked. We're going to load the cell in the page. Okay, so the next thing that happens is when we try to load it, we had an error. So something else was not 100% correct. So in here, we tried to load the page, an error was thrown. And apologies for all the noise on the screen. I'm just trying to kind of zoom in and out. But yeah, so something blew up. So we need to figure out what was going on there. So I wasn't logged in. The first thing I want to do, again, because this query that we added is only available to admins. So the first thing I did was, I wasn't logged in. So I logged in as the user. It still doesn't work. And the reason for that is because that user was not an admin. So I'm just going to go in and change that in the database. Okay. And by doing that and reloading, it should actually work somewhere. So the next thing we find out is, there are no users with cool in their email address. So we have to fix that. So I'm just going to quickly change one. And there it renders. So that's the general idea behind that stuff in terms of workflow. So again, it's basically starting at the request test layer, make that work. You have to change the API layer a little bit, then come down to the component, copy the query in from your tests. You'll have a fully generated type to work from. So again, there's some edges to smooth out, but the concept I think is pretty nice. All right. So next is GitHub CI. And I'll try to do this very quickly because I know I'm running a little bit late. So what we have here out of the box, if you just create a new app and then deploy it, you have to put in a couple keys to make the deployment part work. I'm sorry, if you push the code to GitHub. But by default, it will run all those end-to-end tests, all the request tests, all that stuff that I already showed you, but it will do it on CI. So that's all built in. You don't have to worry about it. The piece that you will need to update is basically like, there's a token and a few other variables that's in the documentation as to how you get it to deploy for you. But one cool thing is there's this artifacts section. And in the artifacts section, it actually has the videos for you. So if your test run fails, you'll again get screenshots and videos. If it passes, you still get the video. And so we don't have to necessarily go through all of this, but that's actually showing the video from the test that I just downloaded from GitHub Actions. So that's been a really, really nice thing to have. And then finally, the other piece I wanted to show, I mentioned Heroku. The update that we just added basically took, we basically added Heroku support, automatically creates all the applications and a pipeline for you to manage it. So this is basically going in, selecting the database type, all of this. And so what I really want to do in the future is take these concepts and bring them over to the other sections so that when you're on Vercel, when you're on Netlify, you have the ability to say, I want my database on Heroku, or I want it on DigitalOcean or AWS, and be able to kind of work all that out. So that's one of the things. Those are the pipelines. And then quickly, in terms of this animation is not going to work at all. Let me just quickly try to do this because it's not too small. So right now in progress, I mentioned Netlify, testing this thing out, feedback. We want to support some of these other deployment platforms. There needs to be a test suite, which as much as we love testing on the app layer, there is no testing yet on Bison itself. Definitely want to fix that. Talk about an upgrade plan. So one big thing, because we're not bundled in a CLI, how do we properly diff everything? And so one potential option, which we're not sure we're going to go with, one potential option is to use git diffs from the clean project to show sort of the changes between versions. So this happens with React Native, which is where we thought maybe it might be a good way. There might be a much, much nicer way to do this automatically, but we need to figure that out. And then, in the future, it's basically There's probably some additional plugins. There's some cleanup that we need to do around it. But I think it's really promising, and more than anything, just to get these ideas out and get everybody kind of leveraging them and see what we need to buckle down and continue to work on and give back to the community. So I basically think there are sort of 4 steps to this whole thing. And right now we're sort of finishing experiment phases, the experiment phase, the share phase. I feel like there's going to be some convergence like we did with Prisma. So it's, again, not going to be that there's going to be one app to rule them all or one way of doing things. But for really high level things, maybe that's auth, maybe that's something else, but just like where we can properly share solutions and everyone can leverage them will be important. And then finally, the biggest piece that I think would be amazing, and I know has been talked about, but it's a very hard problem, is to get these Jamstack providers to start. They don't want to be necessarily database hosts because there's a whole slew of things that happen with that. And, Versal has some integrations, but they don't quite work the way that you would expect. Like if you can get the Heroku database type experience on either of these platforms, that's going to be massive, I think, for the community. And maybe it's an abstraction across other database providers. I don't know. But it would be nice, again, to just sort of have the one spot for your database, your API, front end, all of it. So that's kind of what I see happening over time. And that's it. I have a couple minutes, I think, left, but basically just wanted to introduce everybody to what I see as the whole ecosystem, where I see Bison playing a fit, some of the things that we've thought through and started working on. And yeah, just excited to kind of keep it going. So with that, I can probably stop my screen share. Does anybody have any kind of questions?
Yeah, man, I got questions.
Yeah.
So how did you? I'm curious. How did you come to the decision that you're going to open source this? Was this an in-house project that you open sourced?
Yes.
Or did you guys?
So we have. It's basically we have been working on bringing pieces from app to app and learnings from different apps in this space. So it's not like we've had years of development behind it because this space is so new. But yeah, that was absolutely it. It was just like, hey, we've done now. I think we have done 6 full-scale projects on this type of setup, and so it's really just taking that, and it's a little bit. There's a little bit more edges as I've tried to like generalize it a bit, but I think we can definitely work through them for sure. But yeah, started as that, and I just thought again, like for the community in general, I think it was a good move to bring it out.
I think so. I mean, it looks like you're making some pretty sensible choices, especially. Sticking away from pure serverless. I like that. And it's nice to have more choice. I'm just impressed that, it's 3 weeks old, you've just released it, and it's already 154 stars. I think it's going to pick up steam really fast. How can, what are you hoping for right now? Are you open to contributions from devs?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'd love to get other people's opinion and just sort of see how things work or don't work and where we can kind of go from there on it. For sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Like again, one of the areas that I said if the community hates it, will probably change. I don't know the answer to that question yet, so it'd be good to know.
Interesting, because a lot of them are definitely interested in contributing to open source. They were all over that that Full-Stack meetup. That Redwood.js meetup. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have meetups yet? How's the community organized right now? Is it just a core team? Is there already a core community? How's it?
So again, like just being 3 weeks old, we don't have any of that yet. So it's really just a few members of our team. I compiled all the ideas together from other things that, I didn't create every single piece of code in the app, but compiled from some of our other stuff. And then it's just our internal team at the moment, but we want other contributions and other viewpoints for sure. Gotcha.
Are you guys? Do you guys have a Discord? How would people get in touch with you?
Right now, probably the easiest way for us is Twitter, because the worry or one of these community Discords is good. So that one that I mentioned, the fsJAM or some other one. happy to kind of do it there for now. And because the one thing I don't want to do is introduce more noise to people just because, and like, hey, go join this yet another thing just because. And so we're, maybe at some point that makes sense to do. But for now, I think just kind of communicating, we'll figure that part out, but over Twitter or some of those other communities.
Gotcha. Where do you see fsJAM going? What do you think? What do you think is going to happen in the future? What are job prospects probably like for developers who are looking to get into it?
The biggest one, the biggest question mark. So first of all, the database is the biggest, I think, like the most important layer to sort of figure out, because right now it's definitely like a bolt-on. And the other thing that is difficult that we need to work, we do a lot of healthcare work, and HIPAA is a big thing in that. And you can now get a BAA agreement with AWS for serverless, but there's stuff involved, and like, how do these platforms work with that? And I've talked a little bit with one of the people at Versal about this, and it's hard. It's a hard problem to do, but it's something that, like, I feel like as Jamstack matures, like, if you can bring on that whole section of apps and make sure that, like, yeah, your HIPAA applications are still compliant, you don't have to keep your existing server stuff and then bolt on this other thing, like, that would be really great. But that's, it's time. And it's also risk on those providers' parts too, because they have to be the ones that are like, yes, we are secure, it's safe, but could also be a big source of revenue for them.
The Redwood was talking about that too, where they were talking about how if they can make that connection to FaunaDB seems to be quickly maturing to be a pretty good option for fsJAM. What are your thoughts on the whole database thing? Why is it so? It sounds like it's a ubiquitous problem. Why is it a problem?
I don't know. It's a hard problem, but like, I guess specifically on, we've always shied away from kind of the NoSQL options just because we got completely burned by Mongo back in the day. And, it's probably not the right decision to not look at them, but haven't really had a need to kind of look back. Fauna is the only one that's come out that's kind of like, this seems like a really promising potential. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the database layer is like it's so old and so traditional that it's going to take a lot to shift it. But I think if you can do so in a way that works for all kinds of apps, both kind of serverful and serverless and Jamstack, then I think that's where you're going to win.
Yeah. Did you watch that? I don't know if you're a Trekkie, but there's this one Star Trek episode in the new Picard, and it's 300 years in the future, and they're still getting SQL exceptions. And they actually showed a SQL exception on the screen.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So I don't know. I hope we get rid of. I don't know about get rid of, but I hope they find a better alternative to SQL, because, man, writing those queries and making them, it's just not built for machines to interface with. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody else have any questions for Chris? There's a 10-20 second delay, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's just Hopin. I think they run off Twilio. Okay. Yeah, I think they run off.
Pretty interesting. Twilio. I've never actually used Hopin before.
It's pretty sweet. I like it, but it's still in beta, and it's public beta, but it's still beta. So, for example, if I message you on Hopin, it doesn't ping you. If I, want to hang up, I have to wait 10-20 seconds. Otherwise, it cuts me off. Like, yeah,
got it.
In mid-sentence. Yeah.
Nice.
There's another one. I just saw. Oh man, what's it called? There's another one. There are a few of these coming up. So I think the competition is gonna. I think it's interesting, like it feels like an actual space.
It does, and it's so new, but it totally feels like it's a thing that, again, like, I don't know, a few months ago wasn't really, like, people were working on it, Blitz team and Redwood team have both been working on this for a while, so it's not like they came out overnight, but at the same time, like, it's a pretty new space. And so it's cool to sort of see it converging a bit. And yeah, I don't know, that's the thing I'm looking forward to, just seeing how it grows and seeing what everybody does.
Yeah, me too. I think it's, I feel like we're kind of converging upwards and upwards up the stack. And at some point,
I love that aspect, to be honest.
Yeah. It's like, it's almost like it's being drawn upwards by some kind of force. It's weird. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Did we get a question?
What is event loop?
Event loop? What's event loop? Is it a random plug? Oh, the events platform you're waiting for.
Like, Brandon, do we have a new service already?
Yeah, right. Brandon, if I didn't know you're still here, you wanna hop on and just shoot the shit for a few minutes before we hang up, because we could totally do that. How are you doing? How are you doing for time, Chris? Like it's a bit late.
My camera just shut off.
I'm sorry.
I said I'm okay, but my camera just shut off. So.
Oh gosh. All I see is darkness. Hello, darkness, my friend. Brandon can make
maybe we should reschedule like a. It'd be cool to kind of have just like a group chat on this stuff. I feel like.
Yeah, like I'd love to host. Just we all talked separately. Like the Redwood people talked about Redwood. You talked about Bison. Brandon talked about Blitz. I would love to just do a Zoom conference and just have everybody on the same floor. And I mean, it'd be really cool for me just to hang out with you guys.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, you guys are also super smart, and it'd probably blow my mind just the kind of stuff that you talk about. So I would love to be a part of that.
It's all a facade.
Facade or interface? Okay. Anyway,
Nice.
anyway. Cool. I think we should wrap this up.
Yeah,
this
no worries. We'll do it again. I really appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Thank you for making it.